Welcome to the Westminster Effects Doxology Podcast, where we exist for the glory of God and the total of His people. I'm Cody Fields, president of Westminster Effects. Go buy stuff your guitar at westminstereffects.com. You can join the discussion of the Westminster Effects Doxology Podcast Lounge, and make sure you subscribe and follow and all that good stuff with all our social media channels. Via the interwebs, I'm joined by...
Hey everybody, John Ross here, Westminster Effects artist, Augsburgian Christian, recently massaged. I don't know why that's pertinent, but I feel I feel that I should be honest. Waist up. This was honest. You know, it was by the book, right? From Lincoln, Nebraska. Yeah.
I got nothing.
Hey, if you don't have me here for the humor, why do you even have
why do we even have
right?
How was your massage, John?
It was just fine. It's not something that I do very often, but I've had some neck pain, and my wife scheduled it for me because she knew I wouldn't schedule it for myself.
Yep,
and
being stubborn.
Yeah, no, it was fine. My neck and shoulders still hurt, but everything else around it feels better.
There you go.
And,
I mean, that's what it's all about.
You know, recently, about the turn of the year, I transitioned into management at my actual
Which
job.
Has been a real pain in your neck.
Absolutely. I don't think I've ever been more stressed in my entire life, and I'm sure a lot of that is self-imposed, right? But it doesn't make it any less real, especially when when my motivations are to meet and exceed the expectations of others. There's amount of pressure that accompanies that,
of course,
and so I kind of bear the weight of everything I can on my shoulders, and by the end of the day, god darn if my shoulders don't hurt.
And by the end of the day, you just need a massage.
Right. So no, it was fine. I smell like menthol and stuff right now. I smell like a pack of Cools that's been sitting next to beef jerky too long. That's what I smell like. But
oh man, well, you stole my thunder for what I was going to introduce as the pre-main topic banter, which is, the fact that my last two business trips I've been to Lutheran churches. So am I just Lutheran now, or what? And the answer is no. However, the fact that you dudes always have an 8:00 service at like every Lutheran church is really clutch.
That is fair. And I don't think I've ever been to one that didn't. 8:00 in some cases is late. The early service at my parents' church back home is at 7.
Wow.
Yeah. And the late service is 9:15.
Wow. That takes dedication. That's an entirely different level of dedication.
Yeah, right. On all counts. And it's not just on Easter. That's just your regular Easter sunrise. That baby is 6:15.
Right.
Or 6:30 or something.
Because they're not playing around.
Yeah. So, a lot of people are like, well, that's probably a small church, and you'd be right. And, maybe those of you in small churches would think about all the logistics that go into a Sunday morning. Really, all the people that you'd have to get roused up by, 6:30 or 7 to help with that service. So they have a pipe organ, right? Decent pipe organ. They only play it at like half volume. Like those of you who know organs, the swell cabinet is barely cracked. And
this church I went to in California definitely had a pipe organ, and it was loud. It was impressive.
Louder the better. I remember when I went up to the balcony, I know just a couple things on the organ. And it was between services, and it was like, "Hey, Reverend, can I check out the organ?" He's like, "Sure, I don't care." And so I sat down and I cracked the swell cabinet open, and a bunch of people looked up. It's like, I didn't know it could sound like that. Like, there's the pedal. You just got to go. It goes to 11. But all that to say is they have this isn't uncommon, but they use it a lot. They have a MIDI module that's connected to the organ because it's a digital-ish console. And then all of the pipes are, of course, with the air pumps and electronic actuators.
Mm-hmm.
And when the organist is unable to be there or can't make it for both services, they have all of the hymns are recorded in MIDI, loaded into, I think it's a floppy drive, on the organ.
Floppy drive.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so one of the elders is the organist for the day and sits up behind the organ console and goes, 1, play. And sure enough, I mean, if you've ever seen, or the listeners have ever seen, Rob Scallon's YouTube channel, he does a huge series on large or strange or niche instruments. And one he did was the pipe organ, and they had a MIDI control in theirs too. And he hooked his MacBook up to it through a MIDI interface, and I think did his song Rain over the organ. No different, right? Except in this case, she's recording, and MIDI is the format. So she's recording to MIDI from the console, saving it to disk, and then they're recalling it. But fun little piece. So when I'm on the phone with my parents, he's like, yeah, Kurt played organ again today. Kurt playing organ is pushing a little rubber button underneath and he still doesn't always get it right.
Yeah. It's the Lutheran equivalent to backing tracks is what that is.
Right. So was the one you went to out in Orange, what style of service was it?
It was traditional. Yeah. It was liturgical. Yeah.
Do you remember which liturgy?
I don't recall exactly which one. But
was it Lord's Supper or Service of the Word?
It did involve the Lord's Supper, yes.
Okay. Did you do a canticle, "This is the feast," or "Let the vineyards be fruitful"?
There was a canticle, but I don't recall which one.
And that is why you're not Lutheran.
Right.
That's the litmus test.
If I was Lutheran, I'd be able to tell you XYZ, like all of these.
Right. I mean, in fact, everything you would have said thus far would already be monotone in your head with a little bit of, da 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 da. That's just your internal monologue would be a chant. But
right.
Life goals. It's okay.
Yeah, we'll get there one day. Anyway, so you had the idea for the main topic today, John.
Yeah,
so
I did.
How about you just introduce that thing and
we'll talk more. Get into trouble. Why not? The listeners don't get much of me nowadays, so I'll just fill them up.
Yeah.
So every now and then, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. You can probably relate to this, where you are, part of the worship team for the day, and this isn't relegated specifically to music, right? Could be any kind of leadership form of service,
right?
In the Sunday event, you're on the platform, you're playing lead guitar, sure, and you work for weeks on solo X or part Y, or you come up with this really cool thing that really excites you, really gets you more into the song, more into kind of the atmosphere of playing music and worshiping together through that with the band, and you're all about it. And after church, you're sitting down to lunch and you're like, "Hey, honey, what'd you think about that part that I played in, I mean, I don't know, some song," right? And like, "Well, I saw you having a good time, but I didn't hear anything." Or, very similar, if you're one of the churches that continues to do live streaming and keeps kind of an archive of your worship sets along with that, you listen back to the playthrough and you're like, "Oh, the mix is terrible. I can't, nothing comes out." You or others, and specifically you, "I can't hear myself at all," which means I wasn't in the mix. And it starts that spiraling sort of thought process that if your wife couldn't hear you, or maybe no one else in the band even noticed, and it's not on the live stream, it's like, well, what the heck am I even doing? Like, if I'm not contributing, if you can't hear me, what's the point of me being up there? But then the reasonable side of us, who are perhaps conscious and cognizant of the purpose of worship and the purpose of music and worship, then say, "Well, wait a sec. It's not about me. It's about leading the congregation, and it's about returning praise and thanks to God and singing his gifts back to his people, and back to him, rather. So what am I doing up there anyways, regardless of whether I can be heard?" And so it's this thought process of, well, if I'm not going to be heard, I don't want to play. But if that's the case, then are my motivations right? Should it matter if I'm audible or not? Is there value in the contribution? And if so, from where does that value derive?
Yep. Yeah. There's this is multi-layered, right? Because it's one thing, for instance, and I think this is easiest to do with an electric guitar player. Piano player, you're probably going to be heard. The acoustic guy is only really ever going to disappear within like a big chorus or a big bridge or something like that, right? Most of the time he's going to be pretty audible. Obviously the vocalists are going to be audible.
Yep.
That's important. So normally if you can't hear someone, it's going to be an electric guitarist. And a lot of times what you're dealing with is people who are volunteers on the soundboard.
Sure.
And they don't know really how to mix for an electric guitar. A lot of times that's how it happens.
Right.
A lot of times it's just,
or let's not just place the blame on the sound person. Sometimes we as electric guitar players, whether you're using a modeler or whether you're using your in-ears and a live amp to dial in your tone, we're making something that sounds good for us. Right.
Right.
We're not thinking that
we're not making the tone for the mix.
There we go. And so the sound operator needs to be even more kind of acclimated to think, okay, I need to really, shave some things off and bump the mids a little bit to get this to come through or what have you. So, yeah.
Right. So there's, maybe basic incompetence on our part or the mixer's part. And that's not a slam on anybody. It's just, are you competent or not at this particular skill?
Sure.
Right. It's not an insult. It's just, what's the skill level here? Some people just aren't good at it. Some people don't like electric guitar and will mix you out on purpose, which is another question altogether.
That's fair.
But I do think the question is worth asking, and pushing back on you're not there for you, you're there to serve. Well, yes, that's true. But how well am I actually serving if my parts aren't being heard? If I'm not able to actually adequately serve the song, then am I actually serving the song and serving the people? And I think we got to come down to, no, not really.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why if we choose to do certain music,
mm-hmm.
that music is often best served by a certain arrangement. We just got done talking about organs. Well, there's a reason an organ is well suited, arguably better suited to accompany hymns than a piano is. Piano, You've got two hands, right? You've got bass, you've got melody, and you kind of go from there, right? With organ, you've got bass, you've got melody on multiple different levels to kind of not only shape the feel of the song or the hymn, but the progress of it. And you've also got your feet. So you've got harmony,
the feet that hit the brown notes.
You've got melody, and then you've got your foot pedals on an organ. Even if you're good on the two hands, I'm not, but even if you're good, it's a whole nother adventure. And organists even wear funky little pointy shoes. They're like elves. And and then you think of one of my favorite mainstream bands, Rush. I admit it. I'm a Rush guy.
Fair.
Geddy playing synth, playing bass, and doing the bass pedals. Just bonkers, right? Yeah. All that besides the point. The organ can really capture most of the sonic territory that is needed to kind of back a lot of these hymns. And in fact, the hymns were written for it. If you use a piano, it feels a little lacking, unless you're doing an old spiritual like Amazing Grace or How Great Thou Art. I mean, yes, an organ would elevate it, but there's something sincere about those on piano, right? Small Country Church, a little out of tune, honky tonk piano in the corners. There's something special about that. Similar to, I don't know, pick on Phil Wickham with his 80 bajillion guitar parts and 5 synths and whatever in the tracks.
And you can hear 2.
Right. And if we want to really do justice to This Is Amazing Grace, right? Well, there's a synth part that's needed. There's the acoustic that kind of brings it, carries it along in the verses. There's the electric for the hook parts. And then, of course, there's the trap set and maybe even a piano. And when one of those pieces are missing, people familiar with the song, even if it's not a straight cover, may notice something lacking. I mean, in a band format, drums, bass, guitar, keys, right? If you just have one of each of those, fantastic. But if you miss one, you're like, oh, something just didn't have the right feeling. Not that we're trying to conjure feelings, but I think what we want to stay away from is making music a stumbling block or making it something to pull your attention away, right? We want it to be an enabler for our congregation. And if we're not doing justice to the song, perhaps we're not being good stewards of that job to enable them.
How spicy do we want me to get?
Okay.
I think one of our,
not not Pepper X, but like, I don't know, the OG Last Dab, if we're doing like Hot Ones levels of spicy.
Okay, fair enough.
Let's do it.
I think one possibility is that our churches are effeminate and they're mixing for women.
Like not force.
Right. Like we've all seen the memes about the guy who can, sweep pick and just absolutely demolish an electric guitar and he has no friends. But as soon as he starts to play Oasis on an acoustic guitar, all of the ladies flock to him, right? There's something real about that. And I'm knocking stuff off of my desk. This is really professional broadcasting here.
One job.
Yeah, I had one job.
Yeah.
And but I think there's something to that, even in the church world, is because of, one, feminism infiltrating our churches for the last 100 years. And two, the fact that churches generally run 52 to 55% female. A lot of things get catered to them, right, wrong, or indifferent. Sure. And some of that has come through in our musical choices, and including lyrics, including style, but also including the mixes where, if we're doing this, if we're doing what effectively is a rock band on stage, and
we could be honest about that,
being simplistic about it too, right? In our church, that's not the point. Our point isn't to get up there and rock out. But if we're having a rock band on stage, there should probably be a little more punch to it than we often get.
Right.
So, and honestly, I can't tell you what our mixes with our electric guitars are because I'm always up there when we have an electric guitar. So
yeah, but I don't disagree. And in general, our mixes are fine. It's just on occasion when the things happen, those thoughts pop up. You mention the kind of effeminate trends that are coming through. I mean, not that every worship song
sprinkle what?
not that every worship song needs to be about pickup trucks and beef stew, right? Jesus, you gave me my Dinty Moore, or whatever.
I smell platinum.
going to the top. Man, I hope someone samples that and like uses it for great things.
Let's hope.
That'd be great.
Podcast Lounge, do not let us down here.
But I noticed back when I was a little more active in song selection and things like that, whenever I lead, which isn't often anymore, I do kind of go off on my own and kind of make those song selections. But when I used to be part of the committee that would like new songs or choose songs, which is really just three people. The committee is loose. Triumvirate, perhaps, is more accurate.
The council, as we used to call it before we hired a full-time worship leader.
For sure. And that's effectively what transitioned out as well, is that Josiah has spent more time there. Paul is our director of worship art. So there are some staff positions that are taking care of this. Anyways, what I've noticed is there is a ton of music. CCM, I don't really want to call it worship music because I don't feel it is.
Right.
But that focuses on the value of the person, right? Case in point, there is a distinct difference from I think it's Hillsong's Who You Say I Am, right?
Yep.
And You Say by Lauren Daigle.
Absolutely.
There's a huge difference there. Both songs talk about that our identity comes from the Lord, but the starting point is different. The starting point of Who You Say I Am is in the chains of sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who the Son sets free is free indeed.
Yep.
The starting point of the Daigle song is what the world says of us, what we say about ourselves. Oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I struggle here. I'm stressed out. Zach Williams even has the same thing, Chainbreaker. And are those songs bad? Absolutely not. I don't like Lauren Daigle, but that's more of just a sonic thing. I don't think that there's a problem there, but it's also not a worship song.
Right.
I really don't. And neither is Chainbreaker, right? Is the illusion with an A that God is a chain breaker accurate? Sure. He's also a chain maker, prisoner in chains for the gospel.
Got him.
But that song, which really rose Zach Williams to notoriety, is about his personal struggle. Just because it's not corporately relevant doesn't make it a bad song. It's a great song.
Sure.
But it's not suited for corporate worship because that's not the story of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So much of this music talks about our own personal struggles, our own internal stuff, which again is fine. But when we take it into a worship context, we need to be really good stewards of the words that we're putting in people's mouths. And sometimes that means taking that human condition, right, that starting point, if we're talking about transformation and regeneration and salvation and sanctification, all the great Christian Asians, if we're talking about those things, then we need to find that lowest common denominator of starting point, which is our debt to sin and our deservance of death and hell. And when we say, man, these songs are good, but it's just not right. And I can't put my finger on it. Maybe what you can't put your finger on is the fact that Lutheran card, there's not a proper distinction in law and gospel in these songs that talk about transformation or regeneration, right?
Yep.
Because in the worship music world, we have hymns of praise. We have hymns of praise that may not mention the law, sin, at our debt at all. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a vacuum, but that's fine. In fact, some of the canticles that we talked about earlier as part of the Lutheran Divine Service, those are largely, songs of praise.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, they're prefaced by, O Christ, Lamb of God, who takest away the sins of the world, have mercy on me. Right? So there's this dichotomy there that when we bring in other music that has a great chorus or really a great message, if that starting point is focused wrong, then in the attempt to cater to others, because even if we're talking just style, right, more softer style, Daigle, or I'm losing all of them now. But I say her because I referenced her before. But like even some of the new stuff from Vertical Worship and the really the slower stuff, there's this big emotional component, this emotional kind of downtroddenness is the starting point of a lot of this.
Yep.
And if we're choosing that music because, it has a great payoff at the end, and this is what in general people like, but we're missing that starting point that reflects our actual condition in relation to the Almighty rather than our relationship to others, maybe that's not the best choice, or at least not the best choice to fill the service with it. Again, we got to be careful what words we are putting in people's mouths.
Yeah. Yeah. And that plus, to take it back to the being lost in the mix, are we mixing our songs, our worship, as we call it at Resurrection Church in Greer, South Carolina, as we call it, worship in song before we worship in the Word, right? It's
right. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, are we mixing our songs so loud that we can't hear each other?
That's a good call.
It is a biblical command, Old and New Testament, to sing to each other, right? So we are one, to have our music low enough so that we can hear each other, and we are two, to sing loud enough that we can hear each other. And one of the funny things in Ephesians 5 is it immediately follows that with giving thanks always and for everything, which includes the guy 2 rows back who cannot find the key of A for his life. You're commanded to thank God for that guy, right? Just like the person 2 rows ahead of you who can't stand your voice is commanded to thank God for you.
Right. Fair.
But if we are to sing to one another and to God, then we have to be able to hear each other. And that's where the congregational aspect gets lost, even in congregationally minded music. Here, I'll go Lutheran on you. We've reverted to the pre-Reformation Catholic idea of worship, that the true worship is being performed by the priest on the stage.
Ex operato.
Yeah, and we get to observe it. Right. And we get to have our own little individual experience, and our rapturous emotions all are on our own, which is why we turn the lights down all the way, so we can't even see each other. So everybody closes their eyes, because you might as well at that point. Yeah. All the lights are off.
It's an anecdote episode. I've got another one. Recently, we replaced so in our worship space, it's a double. It serves as the gym for our school that's attached, our Lutheran school that's attached. And it also serves as the worship space for the 211 service. Now, the history of 211 is the lights were always down low because it was a seeker-sensitive service. If people weren't comfortable in the context of a church, we wanted to make sure that they were comfortable. I say that as the royal we. I didn't have any part in the planning. This was back in 2008 when this whole thing started.
Yep.
And the lights were not off, but they were dim. So you could see where you were going, but the stage was so bright that that's where your focus was attention, or your focus was, your attention was focused. Well, recently we replaced the fluorescent lights that are usually on during cleanup or when the gym's in use. And for whatever reason, the back 2 banks of them wouldn't turn off. They just wouldn't turn off. And so we come into worship last week or 2 weeks ago, both, I think. And that back rank, 2 out of the 8 fluorescent light rows were on. And I loved it. Yep. I loved it. It had the same, not just congregational, but familial vibe that I get when we go to our sanctuary service.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, just another opportunity. We are far from the only church that does this, right? I remember in my childhood church, as traditional as you could get before being like super high church, right? And they had this giant brass panel at the back of the sanctuary with all, and the right side were all the switches for all the different lights everywhere. And the left one was this giant rheostat with this knob that was probably about the size of your palm and had a little arrow on it. And in the middle, like right before the sermon, they dimmed the lights. I mean, with the preacher at the time, that was a risky move. Surprised people didn't fall asleep. But even then, it was, okay, let's turn it down ostensibly to focus, right? To focus our attention on where the light is. It's no different than what we see in a lot of our worship spaces today, mine included. But when you turn the lights on, just like at a concert, they put the crowd blinders on. You are sucked out of the show and you're like, there are people here. I am part of whatever this is. You get a sense of, like, if you're at a music festival, right, and they turn the blinders on, and you turn around and see, what feels like for miles people. You're like, I am part of something. I am part of something. And when we have our lights off at church or our lights dimmed at church, I don't think we're feeling like we're part of something. We're
It's
not
just me and
acknowledging
Jesus.
that we're part of something.
It's me and my personal experience with Jesus, which is not what the congregation of the saints is supposed to be about.
Right.
It's not about you individually in Jesus. It's about us. And the more us-minded we can get, whether it's mixes, whether it's singing, whether it's where we set our lights, the more us-focused we get, the better our churches are going to be. The more healthy our churches are going to be, because we're getting our minds off of ourselves.
Right.
It seems silly to even have to say that, but that's the trend. That's the popular thing to do in churches these days, is to, 3 steps to help your marriage sermon series over and over again. The self-help, the self-help songs, right?
Yep.
It's just self-improvement type of stuff. And no wonder we have such anemic churches when we respond to anything cultural, when we respond to anything, well, really anything, even things happening in our own churches. And so the more us focused that we get, in terms of all of us focusing on the glory of God in Jesus Christ, what else is there? What more do you want?
Right.
Like,
I mean, and that's, speaking of starting points, that's we build upon Scripture, and on top of that Scripture, we build together. After that, everything else is well, $10 word, adiaphora, right? It's
the Lutheran pastor at the church that I went to used that word in the sermon. So
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah. We see a lot of Reformed people using regulative versus normative principles of worship. In the Lutheran world. It's certainly normative, but we use the term adiaphora more fluidly to talk about all these other things that are outside of the specifically commanded components.
Right.
But yeah, after that, when we're mindful of others, and not just mindful of others from a philosophical, it's like, oh, we should think of these people and these people. When we're conscious of the group in our lives together, and the shared impact that we want to have on the congregation gathered, and the shared impact that we want the congregation gathered to have on others, I think that'll transform the way we start thinking about things. Perhaps it'll change the way we think about the mix. Maybe it's lower, but there's more punch in certain frequencies. Maybe it changes the song selections that we're doing, or the song styles that we're doing. I would argue that it's less prevalent now, but in the worship wars of the 2000s, and especially in kind of Lutheran circles, there were only a handful of Lutheran churches that did quality band-led worship, right? And most everyone else just copied those churches, including ones even in Lincoln, right? There are in Lincoln and in Columbus and Norfolk, there's churches that started their quote contemporary service modeled after what 211 was, because they saw, oh wow, they're getting so many people, they're getting such great traction. And all of those churches still exist. They're still doing their own things, and they've evolved, as it were, and changed. But in the moment, they were emulating something that worked in a specific context, rather than taking a look at their own context and be like, you know what? We're mostly farmers who have the most personal tradition and value wrapped up in the classic hymns of the faith. Perhaps Stryper isn't the best band to model for our Sunday service.
Stryper. Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know where to go from there. But your point rings true. Is the church gathered is not, we've said this a million times, the church gathered is not an evangelistic event. It is to feed the sheep. We're mindful of people who don't believe yet.
Yeah, we want to be welcoming.
Of course. But
welcoming and physically and emotionally accessible, I'll even say.
Yes.
But
Yes.
that's so we don't want them to be afraid of judgment, of our judgment, the judgment of the people, when
Right.
you walk in the door. Right. But yeah, we need to be feeding the people with steak and potatoes, not honey and milk. That's our job, to take the honey and milk away from the church and give it to the people in need.
You keep eating cotton candy, have a steak.
No.
Have a ribeye. It's better for you. And it's more delicious anyway.
Very much so.
Anyway, any closing thoughts?
Man, I don't know. I think I'm all out of thoughts.
I don't believe you, but we'll close it there anyway.
You shouldn't. It works for me.
Well, thanks for listening to the Westminster Effects Doxology Podcast. Go love God, love your neighbor, make some music, and don't get lost in the mix. We'll see you next time.